Hey everyone, and welcome back. Before we dive in, I need you to do something for me. Imagine a machine lost to history, a ghost of Soviet engineering that could have changed everything. Got it? Now hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because today's story isn't just a dry history lesson. It's a tale of genius, betrayal, and a what-if so massive it haunts the halls of aviation history. I want you with me for every twist and turn. And when we get to the end, I'll have a crucial question for you in the comments. Don't miss it. Now picture this. The late 1930s. The world is holding its breath, teetering on the edge of the abyss. War is not a possibility. It is a grim certainty, whispering from every headline. Yet, in the midst of this gathering storm, within the heart of Stalin's Soviet Union, a different kind of revolution is brewing. A quiet one. It's not happening in the streets or the factories, but in the drawing offices and wind tunnels. This is the story of the helicopter, or as they called it then, the jellicopter. And more specifically, it's the tragic, brilliant story of why one magnificent machine, Ivan Bratukhin's Omega, did not become the harbinger of the Soviet helicopter age. This is a story of a path not taken, and its consequences echo through decades. To truly grasp the audacity of this endeavor, we have to step back and understand the world as it was. We're in the year 1940. Manned, powered, controlled flight is barely 3 decades old. Airplanes have evolved from flimsy biplanes to sleek, all-metal monoplanes. But the dream of vertical flight, a machine that could rise straight up, hover like a hummingbird, and land on a postage stamp, that dream remained just that, a dream. A maddening, tantalizing, engineering nightmare of a dream. Globally, the field was in its absolute infancy. You could count the real contenders on one hand. In Germany, there was the Focke-Wulf FW-61, a strange, elegant machine with 2 massive rotors on outriggers. It flew, yes. It even set records. But let's be honest. Its most famous demonstration was inside the Deutschlandhalle, a massive sports arena. It was a circus act, a proof of concept flying in a controlled, windless environment. It showed the world what could be, but not necessarily what would be practical. Across the Atlantic, the legendary Igor Sikorsky, a Russian émigré, was wrestling with his own creation, the VS-300. This machine looked more like a jungle gym of steel tubes with a single main rotor and a tiny tail rotor. Its early flights were less flights and more controlled hops. It was unstable, tricky, and unpredictable. The world's aviation establishment looked upon these contraptions with a mixture of curiosity and profound skepticism. They were seen as expensive, complex toys, novelties without a clear military or economic purpose. Why waste resources on these jumping bugs when you could build more bombers, more fighters, more transport planes? This was the global landscape. And into this landscape stepped the Soviet Union. Now, here's a crucial point many miss. The USSR was not playing catch-up in this race. They were entering it neck and neck with the supposed leaders. They had their own visionaries, and chief among them was Professor Boris Yuryev, a patriarch of rotorcraft theory at TSAGI, the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute. Yuryev was a prophet in a land not yet ready for his gospel. He battled bureaucracy, indifference, and the overwhelming priority of conventional aircraft. He argued, cajoled, and theorized about the immense strategic advantage of a vehicle that needed no runway. Imagine a scout that could peer over the next hill from a stationary hover. Imagine an evacuation aircraft that could land in a forest clearing to rescue a downed pilot. Imagine a logistics machine that could deliver supplies directly to frontline units, bypassing destroyed roads and bridges. In January of 1940, Yuryev's persistence paid off. OKB-3 was born, the very first specialized helicopter design bureau in the Soviet Union. And to lead this daring venture, they chose not a committee man, not a political appointee, but a true engineer's engineer, Ivan Pavlovich Bratukhin. His mission was not to follow, not to copy, but to leapfrog. To not just match the West, but to define the future himself. And here, my friends, is where Bratukhin made his first, and some would say, fateful decision. He looked at the world's designs and chose the hardest road. He rejected Sikorsky's single-rotor layout. He looked beyond the Focke-Wulf's transverse twin-rotor design and aimed for something even more ambitious. The machine that began to take shape on his drawing boards, known as the Omega or 2 milligrams, was a bold statement. Let's talk about its design because it's key to understanding everything that followed. The Omega was a transverse twin-rotor helicopter. Picture it. A fuselage like a slender boat, and on either side, mounted on stout metal frameworks, two enormous, three-bladed rotors. Each rotor was about 7 meters in diameter. The engine's 2 MV6 units were mounted in nacelles right behind these rotors. A complex system of shafts and gearboxes connected them, ensuring the rotors spun in perfect, synchronized opposition to cancel out each other's torque. The fuselage itself was a practical, no-nonsense affair. A welded steel tube frame covered in fabric. It was functional. It was brutalist. It was beautiful in its pure engineering logic. Now, let's break down why this choice was so brilliant and so perilous. The brilliance, stability and safety. The transverse scheme promised inherent stability in hover. The two rotors provided a wide, balanced footprint in the air. Crucially, if one engine failed, the other could theoretically keep the machine aloft, a massive safety advantage over early single-rotor designs. Lift efficiency. By having two large-diameter rotors, it could generate enormous lift without overloading a single rotor system. No tail rotor, all the engine power went to generating lift and thrust, not wasting a significant portion, 10 to 15% easily, on a small tail rotor just to stop the fuselage from spinning. The peril, complexity. The synchronization system was a nightmare. The interconnecting shaft had to be perfectly balanced and incredibly strong. The gearboxes were works of art that had to translate power at precise angles. Vibrations. This was the monster in the closet. Two large, powerful rotors spinning in close proximity created incredibly complex aerodynamic interference patterns. They could set up harmonic resonances that would shake the entire airframe to pieces. The mathematical models to predict and dampen these vibrations simply did not exist yet. Engineering tolerance. Building those gearboxes and shafts required a level of precision machining that was at the very limit or beyond of Soviet industry's capability in the early 1940s. I want you to appreciate one staggering statistic that proves how far ahead of its time the Omega was. It's called disk loading, the weight of the aircraft divided by the total area swept by its rotors. Think of it as how hard the rotors are working to carry each unit of weight. A lower number is generally better for hover efficiency. Now, the Omega's disk loading was over 30 kilograms per square meter. That seems high, right? But compare it to icons that came decades later. The legendary Mi-8 HIP, the workhorse of the Soviet and global armies from the 1960s onward, has a disk loading of around 27.5. The Omega, designed in the late 30s, was more efficient in this critical metric than a machine built 25 years later. It was a quantum leap. It was, in one number, proof of its advanced conceptual design. But history, as it so often does, intervened with brutal force. The first flight tests were scheduled for August 1941. You know what happened? On June 22nd, Operation Barbarossa began. The Nazi war machine smashed across the border. The Soviet Union was fighting for its very survival. The Omega, this futuristic machine, was suddenly a non-priority. The entire OKB-3 was packed up and evacuated thousands of kilometers east, to Almaty in Kazakhstan. For 2 long years, the project lay dormant while the war raged. Imagine the frustration of Bratukhin and his team. They believed they held a key to a new kind of warfare, and they were stuck in a remote workshop, far from the front where their countrymen were dying. But they did not give up. In 1943, test pilot K.I. Ponomarev finally took the Omega into the air. And then magic. On one of those early flights, the Omega did something no Soviet machine had ever done before. It achieved a stable hover for over 30 seconds. 30 seconds that changed everything. It wasn't a hop. It wasn't a wobble. It was a stable, controlled, stationary perch in the sky. In that moment, Soviet helicopter piloting was born. The dream was real and it worked. But reality came crashing back in. The machine was raw. In the searing Kazakh heat, the air-cooled engines overheated, limiting flights to 12 or 15 minutes. Its maximum speed was only about 115 kilometers per hour, far short of its calculated potential. And then there was the problem, the vibrations. They were insidious, dangerous, and seemingly unsolvable with the tools at hand. The complex gear trains groaned. Resonant frequencies would build up at certain power settings, threatening to shake the rotor mounts loose. The team fought back heroically. They installed oil dampers, tweaked gear ratios, redesigned components. They created an improved version, the Omega 2, with more powerful engines. But it was a battle against physics itself, fought with the technology of the past. This brings us to the tragic, inevitable crossroads of 1945 and the years after. The war was over. Victory was won, but at a cataclysmic cost. The Soviet Union was a smoldering ruin. 27 million dead. Cities leveled. Industry shattered. The new priority was not visionary leaps, but rapid, mass, pragmatic reconstruction. The state looked at its aviation portfolio. On one hand, you had Bratukhin's Omega, a masterpiece of complex, high-precision engineering, a machine that demanded perfect gearboxes, flawless metallurgy, and an understanding of aeroelasticity that was still in its infancy. It was a Ferrari in a nation that needed 1 million reliable trucks. On the other hand, a different designer, Mikhail Mil, was championing the single main rotor with tail rotor design. Think of the future Mil Mi-1. It was simpler. The dynamics were relatively easier to calculate. It could be built on existing airplane factory lines with less exotic tooling. Yes, it had the inherent inefficiency of the tail rotor. Yes, it was less stable in hover. But it was good enough, and it was buildable now. The choice for the exhausted, resource-starved Soviet state was obvious. It wasn't about which machine was better in a pure engineering sense. It was about which machine could be turned into a fleet of usable aircraft soonest. The brilliant, difficult path of the future was sacrificed for the practical, achievable path of the present. KB3 was dissolved. Bratukhin's dream was officially over. But, and this is a monumental but, this was not a total loss. This was a transmutation. The engineers, the draftsmen, the technicians who had lived and breathed with the Omega, who had felt its vibrations in their bones and learned its quirks, they did not vanish. They were absorbed. They went to work for Mil and for Nikolai Kamov. They brought with them the hard-won, painful, invaluable lessons from the Omega project. The knowledge of rotor dynamics, the understanding of vibration modes, the instincts for helicopter control. This DNA was injected directly into the heart of the Soviet helicopter industry. The Mi-1-, the Ka-10-, and every helicopter that followed carried within them a ghost of Bratukhin's Omega. He lost his bureau, but his intellectual legacy won the war for Soviet rotorcraft supremacy. He was the unsung foundation. So, why did the Omega not open the era of Soviet helicopters? It wasn't because it was a bad design. Far from it. It was because it was too good, too advanced for its moment in history. It was a machine conceived in the theoretical 1930s, born into the fiery crucible of war, and asked to mature in the exhausted, impoverished post-war landscape. It demanded a technological base that did not yet exist. It was a prophet without a country ready for its message. The path of the transverse rotor was largely abandoned in the USSR, though Kamov would famously use a coaxial twin-rotor system for naval helicopters. The Mil single-rotor design became the Soviet and later Russian standard. It worked. It worked wonderfully. But one can't help but wonder, what if? What if resources had been poured into solving the Omega's vibration issues? What if its advanced layout had been perfected? Would we have seen heavy-lift helicopter giants in the 1950s? Could the entire tactical and logistical playbook of the Cold War have been different? The Omega stands as a majestic, poignant monument to an alternative timeline. A reminder that progress is not a straight line, but a maze of choices, compromises, and roads not taken. It is a story of a genius who saw the summit but couldn't build a bridge across the chasm in time. And that brings me to my final question for you, the one I promised at the start. It's the core dilemma of this entire saga. In moments of extreme national crisis and rebuilding, is it ever the right choice to sacrifice a visionary, complex technology of the future for a simpler, reliable technology of the present. Was the Soviet state right to shut down Bratukhin's dream to focus on Mill's pragmatism? Or did they, in doing so, lose a chance to dominate the next generation of aviation from the very start? This isn't just a history question. It's a question about innovation, risk, and survival. I want to hear your passionate arguments in the comments below. Write future if you believe in backing the visionary, no matter how hard. Write pragmatism if you believe survival and rebuilding must always come first. Let's get a real debate going. If this deep dive into a forgotten fragment of history gripped you, if you feel that chill of what if, then you belong here. Subscribe to this channel. We resurrect lost stories, we analyze the crossroads of technology and fate, and we never shy away from the tough questions. Hit that like button to help this story reach more curious minds. And most importantly, comment. Your perspective adds another piece to the puzzle. History isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why, so we can navigate our own choices better. Don't just be a spectator. Be part of the conversation. I'll be reading every single one.